As many of you know, I have had the tradition all of the time in my ministry of reading or telling a story at Christmas Eve service. So about 6 weeks ago, I started my search for the story for tonight. I read and reread some of my favorite Christmas stories. Stories of love and surprising connections over the years. Stories of hope and faith. Stories that are meant to show forth the ideals or character of Christmas and the birth of Jesus the Christ. I went to my favorite authors and I went to some new ones too. And of course, in desperation, I Googled Christmas stories, right? That's what we would all do. None of them resonated with me this year. Either they were too trite or too sentimental or too often told or just too. I have to say I began to panic just a little bit. And I've been in prayer about it, and I told God that I was in a hurry and I needed it sooner rather than later. And then this week, I read my two favorite bloggers, Michelle Perry, an artist and author who writes a lot about spirituality, and Reverend Nadia Bolz-Weber, the Lutheran pastor that I quote often. I read Michelle's first, and she wrote it this past Saturday night on the winter solstice, which is the longest night of the year. I'd like to quote part of it. This is Michelle writing. I watched the brightness wane and the colors fade from the sky outside my studio window this evening. Charlie, my toy poodle, was curled up on my lap as the shadows lengthened and the darkness slowly enveloped us. Our only light was the candle above on my desk. It was like being embraced by the knowing silence of an old friend. I spent 7 years living in Africa without running water or electricity. Me, the Girl Scout who refused to tent camp because of bugs. There in Africa, I learned the beauty of living by the rhythms of light and seasons close to the earth. Something we are too easily divorced from in our world lived between screens. Don't get me wrong, I love the option of electricity, but I also love leaving it off at times. And at night, when I would light my lantern in Africa, I was always amazed at how the smallest speck of light could banish a room full of darkness. As I sat in my studio this evening, I thought about that again, and I scratched the following thoughts in a notebook. This is her poem on the longest night of the year. On this, the longest night of the year, when the shadows chase the dawn, and it feels like the dark is bigger by far than the hope of what's to come. On this, the longest night of the year, when the darkness crowds the light, yet we need but the smallest spark for the flicker of hope to ignite. Even the fiercest night bows and bends to the tiniest lantern flame. All the darkness that's ever been can't extinguish one single light that still remains. On this, the longest night, when the dawn feels furthest away, we don't need the strength of 1,000 suns. We simply need to join our flames. And then later in the week, Nadia showed up in my inbox with a preview of the Christmas Eve sermon she is delivering tonight in a few hours at a women's prison in Colorado. It was also about the light. And she had this to say about the light. This year, for some reason, I haven't been able to get into the stories that I normally have. I've mostly been drawn to the Christmas story in John. There's no manger or angels in that one, just these mystical verses. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the light was the light of all people. The light shines in darkness, and the darkness has not overpowered it. And the Word became flesh and lived among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory as a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. It is this story about the birth of Christ that I couldn't stop thinking about on Saturday, Nadia writes, because Saturday was the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. And man, did I feel it. These short days and long nights are brutal. And I know being in prison is brutal, and being in prison on Christmas is brutal. Nadia goes on to give some advice on how these women will bear the brutality. And then she writes, last Saturday night, in the darkness of the longest night, these words from John were on repeat in my head. A light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overpowered it. This is the thing about life, my friends. Even the tiniest bit of light scatters the deepest darkness. It never happens the other way around, never. Darkness has no effect on light. Darkness cannot touch it, cannot extinguish it, cannot do a thing to it. Tonight, I think it's perfect for us to think about that light that came into the world, that the darkness cannot hold sway or have any power over it. That light has been burning for a couple of thousand years, and so far no one has been able to extinguish it. We have the power, and yes, and the call to share that light all around us. We have the power to be that little source of light to someone who is discouraged or hurting or lonely. That's our work. I started my search weeks ago for a story with a book by Maya Angelou, Letters to My Daughter. I highly recommend this book, but the story that spoke to me was one about Fannie Lou Hamer, an important civil rights worker that Maya writes an entire chapter about to her daughter. I quote Maya, "The human heart is so delicate and sensitive that it always needs some tangible encouragement to prevent it from faltering in its labor. And the human heart is so robust, so tough, that once encouraged, it beats its rhythm with a loud, unswerving insistency. One thing that encourages the heart is music. Through the ages, we have created songs to grow on and to live by. We Americans have created music to embolden the hearts and inspire the spirit of people all over the world," Maya wrote. Fannie Lou Hamer knew that she was one woman and only one woman. However, she knew that she had a light to shine on the darkness of racism. And it was that little light that she aimed directly at the gloom of ignorance that made the difference. Fannie Lou's favorite was a simple song that we all know, and we've all sung it since childhood, haven't we? This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. I'm gonna let it shine. I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Christ's light continues to shine through the darkness in us, for us. And like Michelle said in her poem, we simply need to join our lights together. Or like that praise song that we sing states, it only takes a spark to get a fire going. Amen.